What are we here for? Oh, that's right. This is January 6th, so Happy New Year. This is the beginning of the new year. And as I promised last fall, we're going to pick up the Gospel of John again. We cut it off short, right at chapter 11 back in September. So we're gonna pick up where we left off with the purposes of timing it so that as we move through the last half of John, we get to Easter just as John's talking about Easter. So that'll be kind of fun. And if you didn't know it before, if someone asked you, tell me what the entire outline of the Gospel of John is, you can say it's just two pieces. The first piece, the first 11 chapters, is Jesus' ministry before the Passion Week, and the last 10 chapters is his ministry during the Passion Week. So there's 3.5 years, 3 years crammed into the first 11 chapters, and then the last 10 chapters is the last week of his life. So we're getting ready. We just finished that first half last September. We're getting ready to start the second half. So we're actually, from now until Easter, going to cover about 6 days in the life of Jesus for the next 4 months, 3 months, something like that. So that's what we're going to. So let's do a review. We left the whole story back in September 7th. We left it with this right here, not with the resurrection of Jesus, but with the resurrection of Lazarus. Caused a big stink. Remember that? Big stink. Literally, yeah. Thou stinketh. So that's where we're going to pick up. I'll just remind you where we're at. Remember, Jesus did these very famous words. He put his entire reputation as a preacher of the gospel, he put his entire reputation on these 3 little words right here as he stood in front of this tomb and said, Lazarus, come forth. And if nobody came forth, that would have been the end for Jesus. He stuck his neck out. He put it out there. There was no risk for him because he's the one that's the Lord of heaven and earth. He's the one who gives life. It's just no big risk. And then Lazarus comes out. Wow. So it was an amazing thing. We're looking at John because John later on, we'll see near the end of Easter, he says, I've written so that you'll believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that believing you'll have life in his name. Now we say this over and over again because John's purpose isn't just to educate our heads. John's purpose is to give us a clear understanding of who Jesus is, and in embracing who he is, change who we are in the process and bring life. So that's why we're doing this. So let's go on. If you remember, the stink also happened because after Lazarus was raised from the dead, this is near the end of John 11, from that day on, the Pharisees, actually the religious leadership, planned together to kill him. To kill who? Well, actually, at this point, to kill Jesus, because he's doing these big things. In a second, you'll also see that they planned to kill Lazarus, because he was a very embarrassing walking guy. There he is, the guy who came from the dead. Therefore, Jesus, at this point, no longer continued to walk publicly among the Jews, but went away from there to the country near the wilderness, into the city called Ephraim, and there he stayed with the disciples. So as we close out chapter 11, and before he comes into Passion Week, he's hiding out. Because he knows that if he shows his face, it's going to start an arrest and a death that's going to be premature. So he's got to time this just right. So he goes into hiding, which is why what's going to happen this morning in chapter 12 is so astonishing. We leave chapter 11 with him in hiding. Chapter 12, he's not in hiding anymore. Here's what happens. I'm going to skip a few things in the beginning. Near the end of John 11, it says the Passover of the Jews was near. This is the Passion Week. The Passover of the Jews was near, and many went up to Jerusalem out of the country before the Passover to purify themselves. And they came, verse 56, they were seeking for Jesus and were saying to one another as they stood in the temple, gee, what do you think? That he will not come to the feast at all? So they know that Jesus is hiding out. They know that there's actually a price on his head. They're wondering, here we are at the Passover. He has been at the ones before this. This is one of the 3 mandatory events that you come and worship in Jerusalem for. Is he not going to come since it could mean his death? And that's the question on everyone's lips at this Passover. Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was to report it so that they might seize him. This primarily because he raised Lazarus from the dead. Okay? So here we go. We switch over now into the Passion Week. I have to use a couple of really fancy transitions from time to time to just make you dizzy. So here we are. We start the Passion Week. John 12 is going to go all the way through the end of John. And we start with this scene with Jesus coming into Jerusalem as the king. So we're going to look at this. But before we get to that entrance, a couple things happen. And I call it the spikenard incident. The spikenard incident. Nard is a horrible word for a wonderfully fragrant perfume that's used. Hey, what's that smell you have on you today? Nard. So here's the spikenard incident. This happens before Jesus comes into Jerusalem. He's close, though. He's right over the mountain, right over the ridge called the Mount of Olives in the city of Bethany. Jesus, therefore, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead, just in case you'd forgotten. I like that. You know the guy he raised from the dead? So they made him a supper there, and Martha, that's his sister, was serving, but Lazarus was one who was reclining at table with him. Mary then took a pound of very costly perfume of pure nard, and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. And then it goes, what does it smell like? It'd be nice to have scratch and sniff Bibles. Because I don't know. That's the downside. Scratch and sniff Lazarus from the dead might be bad. Yeah. Oh, so we don't know what it is. But actually, just to let you know, nard at the time was probably one of the costliest perfumes they had. It actually grows from a little flower plant that's native in India, actually in the Himalayas, as you go up in altitude in India. And so, you make it from that. So to have this in Palestine, the Romans, they would import it into that area and on to Rome. So it was just a tiny little flower that grew in the Himalayas that's here, and she's got an entire pound of this stuff. Yeah,
it's a distilled oil, basically.
Yeah.
And we have a connection in our business to the ancient distillers.
Is that right?
Yeah.
The distillers of nard?
The original frankincense came up the frankincense trail.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
there's a little deal about the nard. There's a very, very, it was even more precious than myrrh or frankincense.
Yeah, very expensive.
Very, very, very aromatic.
Yeah.
Really
Evidently, it
smell.
was the top. If you name the best perfume going, this is it. And she had a pound of it.
You can buy it at trueot.com.
You can't buy nard at trueot.com?
Oh, that's way too.
Oh, okay, too expensive. Well, you think about it, if you cook, you know that saffron, the orangish yellow stuff you use to cook with, that just comes from the pistil stamens or whatever from small flowers, and it's very expensive. If you think about that, then you're thinking nard, but fragrant in that sense. So it's really hard to come by. Well, here's the reaction. I'm going to skip a few verses because I want to get to a bigger thing at the end here. But a large crowd of the Jews then learned that Jesus was there having dinner with them at the spikenard incident, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might also see Lazarus, whom he raised from the dead. But the chief priests planned to put Lazarus to death also, because on account of, what's that? That is redundant, I know. The chief priests planned to put Lazarus to death also, because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away and were believing in Jesus. I hate that. So they saw Lazarus as a real problem. He would walk around and say, that's the guy. He was dead, now he's alive. How? Jesus, really? And people were attracted to that. So actually, the raising of Lazarus is the trigger that starts the Passion Week persecution of Jesus. That was just such a huge event. And it was in such a visible place, so close to Jerusalem. There's so many people that saw it. I mean, it's craziness. You have to understand this whole situation, understand what's going to come up next, because that overshadows everything in this. It puts a price on Jesus' head. It puts a price on Lazarus' head. It says to everybody, Jesus is extraordinarily different from everybody else. If he even shows his face in Jerusalem, he's going to get killed unless he is the almighty, powerful Messiah, and we're going to see fireworks. So if Jesus shows up on the scene, this is going to be the coolest Passover you've ever had. This is really the expectation. This is a big, big deal. Okay. Well, I don't think so. The Chinese did back then. I don't know. So here we go. So I'm going to skip. This is where we get to right here. The grand entrance in John 12. And so the people who were with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to testify about him. So here's Jesus who's coming down the mountainside. By the way, Lazarus and Martha and Mary's house is just on the other side of this hill, is what it is. So he's come to that hill, has dinner that night, and then the next morning he does this. He comes down. If you've been to Israel and you've been to the Temple Mount area where the Dome of the Rock is and stuff like that, if you look directly east, you'll see this ridge, which is the Mount of Olives, small valley and a ridge that's right across there. So when Jesus is in this picture, is coming to Jerusalem over that hill, he's actually just cutting right down the face of that hill in full view of everyone in Jerusalem. I mean, it's like being on a stage almost. There's this huge bunch of people coming over the top of the hill, coming down across the face of the hill. They'll go under the Kidron Valley and eventually right into the temple area. So this is like, here I am, right here I am. And it's not a silent entry. He's got, it says right here, people who are coming with them from over the hill who saw Lazarus raised. And there's a big bunch of people from Bethany area and beyond who are coming right behind him saying, here's our guy, here's our guy. And that's what it is right here. So you can think of them as actually coming down this way. The people who saw Lazarus raised from the tomb, they're coming behind him and they're testifying about him as he's coming into town. It's a big deal. And this also raises a lot of interest from the people in town who are looking across the Kidron Valley, seeing this big event with this guy coming into town. Is this Jesus? I think it is. And look at all the people behind him. And so they run out of town and come up to him from the other side. For this reason also, the people went and met him because they heard that he had performed this sign. So now as he's coming into town, this is not the hiding Jesus anymore. He is clearly coming to say, here I am. There's no hiding anymore. Here I am. In full view of all the religious leaders right across the little valley right there. I mean, it's just like, here I am. People from the Bethany and behind who saw Lazarus coming with him. People running out from the city coming up to meet him. I mean, it's a really big deal on the side of the Mount of Olives. In your face, Jerusalem. That's what this is. And riding on a donkey. And by the way, we don't point this out too much, but riding on a donkey, of course, it was prophesied. He had to do it that way. But when a king comes into town, a king can choose to come in either on a horse or a donkey. If he comes in on a horse, he's coming to take you over militarily. Because a horse is a war machine, is what it is. But if he comes on a donkey, he's coming in peace. Now, there's many cases in the Old Testament where we see people with high reputations appearing on the scene on donkeys, deliberately to say, I come in peace. But if you come, a horse is like a tank. That's how I've always said it. If you think about a tank in warfare battle with soldiers and stuff, and a tank comes, everyone runs away from a tank because it's so powerful. A horse was that in ancient times. So when a horse came on the scene, it was, I'm going to take you over, here we go. And so you'd lead with your horses. The king would sometimes be right in front. So this is Jesus, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, coming into town, deliberately saying, I'm coming in peace. But that's not what people wanted. So here he comes into town like this, huge grand entrance, right in the face of all the religious leaders. So the Pharisees said to one another, what do you think the Pharisees said when they saw this? Because I bet you money they're standing in the Temple Mount area, looking across the valley going, oh, man. Now they wanted to find him. They had a price on his head. But as they see the people coming behind, and the people running out from the city, and they see this huge horde of people that are saying, this is Jesus, he's the king. They're going, oh, nuts. Yeah, now we got a problem. There he is, but how do we take him down? So this is what they say to each other. I just love this. You see that you're not doing any good. Look, the world has gone after him. They're saying this to each other. They're saying, look, you haven't done the right, you're not doing any good, you guys. They're pointing at each other. They're not pointing at somebody else. Look, you're failing. Look, you're failing. They're all going to him. And they don't know what to do. And they say, look, the world is coming to him. And I bet you from that temple area, as you look across the Kidron Valley and you look at the side of this mountain, you see them coming down, all the people, the religious leaders are saying, we've lost. Well, look at all the people. And not just a few of the people. They use the biggest word they can think of. The whole world is going to him. Now, they're the religious leaders. People are supposed to follow them. And yet the town seems like it evacuates over to the hillside of the Mount of Olives to welcome this one. And they're left standing there ignored. Yeah, true.
Jim, as I read this before you talk, I just marvel at their mindset. I mean,
marvel at their mindset, yeah.
It just really,
yeah.
Christ came to them in their face and told them, you are the sons, you are the father of the devil.
Father of the devil,
and
right.
The evil, it must have been in that to see the evidence, the testimony of Lazarus, and to try and put him to death.
Yeah.
Instead of
yeah.
saying, this is my salvation.
Yeah, how in the face of all that evidence do you not finally knuckle under and say, okay, we give up?
They had to be completely and totally connected to Satan.
Yeah.
Completely.
Well, and in fact, a big tip-off that they're really connected to Satan, the religious leaders, when a piece of truth, let's take like the truth of the raising of Lazarus. When the truth of the raising of Lazarus becomes public knowledge, and some people in power elect to try and hide that truth by killing the guy, by hiding the truth, then you know there's something not right with these guys. Anyone who's in power who tries to protect being in power by hiding the truth, that's not right. There's something really whacked out about that. And that's exactly what they do. Let's rub out the evidence of who this guy is that raised from the dead. Let's rub out this knowledge about who this Jesus is. We'll just get rid of this and we'll go on with life as usual. And yet here's the truth. This man, Jesus, can raise people from the dead. And there's the guy who came from the dead right there. Well, power corrupts. And this is what it is. They're trying to protect.
Lazarus because Lazarus was
You couldn't kill Lazarus?
a well-to-do, rich
Yeah.
person that
He had
everybody knew.
He had rights. And wouldn't it be embarrassing if you killed him a second time and Jesus brought him back? That's what I've always thought. I thought, we'll take care of him. Oh, he's back again. I thought, that gambit's not going to work anymore. So here's the position of the religious leaders. They see Jesus as a tremendous threat. Why? Because he's true and because he's messianic? No, because people are following him and they're not following us. And that's the situation you get in with this big triumphal entry. Jesus comes in unabashedly looking like a king who's going to come in and occupy his throne to his people, not to conquer this town, but to come and take his rightful place in the town in peace. And the religion.
If you look at what he wore, he did not wear kingly robes.
No, came in as a normal guy. It's a normal guy. So here's the context, and we're going to go on to a scene after all of this. This is a very familiar scene to you. I recommend you look at it, but it sets the stage for what comes up next. And this is what we want to spend our time on. They said the world has gone after him, and sure enough, in the next few verses, there's a bunch of insistent Greeks that come to him. The insistent Greek incident. So here's what happens right after that. So Jesus finally gets into town, huge mobs of people. Now, there were some Greeks among those who were going up to worship at the feast. And when he says Greeks, he's really in a shorthand saying Gentiles from Greece. And a lot of people have said, what are these guys doing at the Passover? It's kind of odd. Were they Jews? Probably not, most people think. Probably not. But you have to understand the Greeks. The Greeks at the time were, they were known for being intellectuals, for one thing. They were philosophers. You could spend all afternoon talking philosophy with these guys. They had great and rich heritage, Aristotle and Plato, stuff like that. But they also had a high value for understanding new things that no one else knows. And so as a result, the Greeks were world travelers. They would get up and they just get on a boat and go places just for the experience of understanding what's there. It was rife. In fact, if I got my facts straight, if you go up the Nile River, there's an Egyptian old archaeological site up the Nile River where the Egyptians had put some stuff back Pharaoh's time. There's actually on these Egyptian things, there's some what do you call it? These Greeks went up the river just to see what it was all about, and they carved their names in these Egyptian columns. Graffiti, that's what it was. Tourist graffiti from the Greeks in the Egyptian lands, because that's what they did. Yeah.
Library of Alexandria.
Yeah, the Library in Alexandria, yeah.
Caesar destroyed that.
Yeah.
That was a
Huge library, yeah. The seat of all the knowledge. The Greeks were knowledge freaks is what they were. So, yeah, so when they see this all going on in Jerusalem, they're there just as intellectual tourists, probably. And they see this scene with Jesus coming down the hillside and people coming behind him and people running out from the city. They see the religious leaders going, oh, man. And they see this whole thing going down. They're thinking, well, we're in town. We got to check this guy out. So they come up to Jesus. And Jesus is not easy to get to at this time, it turns out. And says, we want to see this Jesus guy. So here they are. This is Tissot's version of what this all looked like. Verse 21. These then came to Philip, one of the apostles, who was from Bethsaida of Galilee, and began to ask him, because they couldn't quite find where Jesus was, and asked Philip instead, Sir, we wish to see Jesus. Well, get in line. Everyone wanted to see Jesus based on this whole event coming down the Mount of Olives. Everyone did. Well, Philip is not sure what to do. This is a big and busy time for Jesus, and there's just craziness going on. So what he does is he goes to Andrew. And then Andrew says, well, let's just take him. So Andrew and Philip came and they told Jesus. And Jesus answered them, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. He answered them. We don't know what they asked. But clearly his answer was, what you're seeing is the Son of Man is going to be glorified today. Now, all the Jews in the crowd who heard this kind of went, yippee! This is going to be the big fireworks scene. He's coming in, the glorifying means to make known in a big way, big broadcast, splashy way, the nature and character of God the Messiah. It's no longer hiding in Ephraim. This, boom, fireworks. It's coming for me today. That's right. Get rid of the Romans, get rid of all injustice, bring in an eternity of peace. This is going to be the day. Woohoo, it's going to happen right now. He uses a couple of phrases that we need to qualify here because he's using language that the Jews specifically go, aha, when they hear it. Okay, so let's look. He says the Son of Man. Do you know what that phrase is all about? I'm going to give you something you've probably never seen before. It's going to blow your mind. But the Son of Man is not just a carelessly chosen little phrase. This is the code word for Messiah, but big and bold, the biggest code word you can use in the entire world is this phrase, Son of Man. But it doesn't mean just like Son of Man. Well, yeah, it means human being. But by the time you get to Jesus' time, that phrase in Jewish thinking and in mindset is huge. That's Messiah. It comes from Daniel 7. And Daniel 7, I'm going to give you a little preview on Daniel 7, and you'll see what I'm talking about right here. Craziness. Okay, so hold with me just for a second here. In Daniel, we should study this sometime. Daniel, he's one of the guys who gets carried off from Israel into Babylon. He's respected very highly by the leadership that's right there. And it turns out he gets his reputation because he can interpret Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. And Nebuchadnezzar has some very troubling dreams. And one of his first dreams is this picture on the left. The left half of it with that giant statue, gold head, silver, bronze, iron legs, stuff like that. And it turns out he can interpret for Nebuchadnezzar what that means. It's actually a sequence of world kingdoms is coming. And then Daniel himself, a couple chapters later, has a vision, a dream himself, which has a whole bunch of crazy, crazy beasts. A lion with wings on the top there, a bear with 3 ribs in its mouth. What? A leopard that has has 4 wings and multiple heads, and then bottom a beast with 10 horns. What in the world? It turns out they're actually pointing to the same 4 kingdoms. I'll show you. He says basically this head of fine gold in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and then Daniel's dream, the lion with eagle's wings. That's actually a prediction about the life of the kingdom of Babylon. Babylon was very much like that. And the kingdom that would supplant that later on is in the second part of this. The chest and arms of silver and the bear with the 3 ribs in his mouth, definitely the Medo-Persian Empire. And we could go into why it reflects those things. They're actually perfect matches, it turns out. This is the next kingdom that's going to come up. Now he's prophesying about the future. And then another kingdom, a worldwide dominating kingdom will arise that will supplant that. The belly and the thighs of bronze on Nebuchadnezzar's giant, as opposed to the leopard with the 4 wings and 4 heads. That's Greece. That's Greece. Alexander the Great, you heard of him? That's the Greece we're talking about. Worldwide power. And when Alexander the Great dies, the kingdom is split up between his 4 sons. And that's the foursome you see in this picture. That's definitely Greece. No one debates this. And then finally, this bottom part down here, these legs with iron that are mixed with iron and clay, which means it's hard, but it's also brittle. And down here, it's this beast with 10 horns. It's kind of a divided kingdom. Almost everyone agrees that's Rome. Without question, that's Rome. Especially the iron part of it kind of tips off to that. So in these dreams, you're thinking, when are we going to get back to Jesus? Well, just wait a second. In these dreams, Daniel interprets for Nebuchadnezzar the coming world kingdoms that would take over the world, one after another. In fact, it's so accurate when you look at why you would attribute it these ways, that biblical scholars for years used to say, well, Daniel's probably a forgery. It was written way after all these kingdoms because you just can't predict something this accurately at the time of Daniel. It must have been written afterwards, after all these things. But they can prove that Daniel was written when he was written. It's clearly an astonishing prediction of the succession of world kingdoms that would come. Weird, totally weird. But there's one more kingdom after this. And it's a stone that comes and crushes the big statue. And it's the Son of Man, which brings in an everlasting kingdom of God. So all of these kingdoms will go until the one last kingdom will come. And who's in charge of that last kingdom? Do we give it a picture of another roaring lion or some kind of snake or some kind of other wild, heinous, powerful beast? We give him just the phrase, a son of man, which Daniel had always meant just to mean a man. A man will come and establish an eternal kingdom that will throw away the Roman kingdom after that and establish a kingdom that will never end. Yeah.
This would happen in the time of the bronze or the iron and clay kingdom.
And
that's the first part of it.
That's right.
Clear.
That's right.
And so, again, Mormonism says that Mormonism is this great stone cut out of the mountain without hands.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
they totally ignore that time frame where it's very clear in
Yeah.
Daniel's vision. It was at the time of this kingdom of iron and clay.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Exactly.
Oh, yeah, we should go back and look at this sometime because this is fascinating. But the reason I bring this up is because the ruler of that last kingdom that will blitz them all and be eternal is the Son of Man, the kingdom of the Son of Man. Daniel writes that during the time of Nebuchadnezzar, during that captivity in Babylon. All the rest of the Old Testament goes out before Jesus shows up. There's a big intertestamental period between the last thing that's prophesied and the end of the Old Testament, the coming of Jesus. But all through that time, when Jerusalem and Israel is being done dirt to by kingdoms, by the Greeks, by the Romans, when will this ever end? All they would keep saying is, but Daniel said one would come, the Son of Man, and he would crush it all and establish an eternal kingdom that will never end. So when you see the word Son of Man, he's the one that establishes the eternal kingdom that's more powerful than all the kingdoms that ever have been. You're going to say?
Okay, I just want to know, okay, I know about the statue.
Right. You know the statue.
Okay, and I know the progression.
Right.
Okay, now the clay and the iron.
The clay and the iron.
Wouldn't that be destroyed? Because clay is not, it just destroys like that.
Clay is very brittle.
Yeah.
You can step on it and
And then
crack it.
iron,
Right.
and then what we have, brass, and...
Okay, well, you know what? We don't have time to
So,
really...
but do they have a certain amount of time that each one of these rule?
Well, according to Daniel's interpretation from God, these kingdoms would all supplant each other. There would be this one, then this one would take control. Then this one would, and that's exactly what happens. Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. Babylon, Medo-Persia, I mean, you go on down the whole list, the Greeks, the Romans, it's exactly what happens in history. We don't have time to work through a lot of it. It's important that the 2 legs of iron have 10 toes because the beast has 10 horns. Huh? What are you talking about? And it's important that it has feet of clay as well as feet of iron. It can be busted as well as being strong. It's kind of an interesting thing. We don't have time to look at it again, but all I wanted to let you know was that in the Jewish mindset, I'm trying to get this replicated in your head, in the Jewish mindset, there would be powerful kingdoms that could never be resisted, starting with Babylon, that you just could not fight against, and that eventually Israel would be exonerated by an eternal kingdom that would squash them all and would come from the Son of Man. Yeah.
And just to emphasize that again, Jim, you got 400 years of silence.
400 years of silence after the Old
Prophet
Testament.
was given. They were looking
Yep.
for the Son of Man. That's all they were talking about.
All they were
Son of
talking
Man,
about.
Son of Man,
Exactly.
Son of Man.
That whole period between the last breath that's spoken in the Old Testament, it's about 400 years till you get to Jesus, and the injustices of these rolling kingdoms that would just keep stomping on top of them. All they could talk about was the Son of Man. There's a whole class of literature that's non-biblical called the apocalyptics. They were literature that was written in those 400 years. And they sort of expanded on what Daniel said and expanded on this hope that's going to come from this Messiah. And it's all going to come from the Son of Man, the Son of Man. For 400 years, that's all they talked about. The Son of Man will come and make this right. He'll make this right. He'll make this right. The Medo-Persians, the Romans, the Greeks, when our Son of Man comes, he'll show you.
That's Flavius Josephus.
Josephus, yep.
Josephus, Son of Man,
Son of Man, Son of Man. So this phrase, Son of Man, don't underestimate it. Daniel originally intended it to be a contrast to the beast. It's going to be a man who's going to do this, but a man with a very special access to God. And he talks about that in Daniel. So when Jesus stands up in front of them and says, the Son of Man will be glorified today, this is what they're expecting. a giant rock that's not hewn by hands that will come down and crush the statue, that'll crush and kill that last. It'll be, oh, this is what they're thinking. I can't make this big enough. This is the only way I could think of making big enough is give you cartoon pictures. I mean, it's just huge. Son of Man, for 400 years, we're waiting. And Jesus stands up in front of them after coming down the mountain and says, Son of Man. Now, drum roll, yeah. And then, Jesus wasn't hiding before this because he knew there was a price on his head. So for everyone watching this, they're saying, if he's deliberately putting himself in the public eye and standing up in front of these tourist Greeks and saying, Son of Man, they're thinking, well, he must be invincible. You wouldn't do that because this is going to be a death sentence if you make yourself that public.
He knew it.
And he knew it. He goes on and says some other astonishing things. He says the Son of Man will be glorified. This is what, Daniel 7, I just put this in here. He says, I kept looking in the night visions. This is after the visions of those creatures and stuff. And behold, with the clouds of heaven, and one like a son of man. In Daniel's time, that was just a phrase for saying a human being. It wasn't anything really special. It was a son of man who was coming, and he came up to the Ancient of Days, another way of talking about Heavenly Father, and was presented before him, which no one can do because no one can stand in front of God and live because of our sins. So clearly this guy is qualified beyond anything we can believe. He stands before the Ancient of Days, and to him was given dominion, that means control everything, glory, that means it's not going to be a secret, and a kingdom that all the peoples, all the nations, all men of every language might serve him. This is a world leader, not just a nation leader, right? His dominion is an everlasting dominion which will not pass away, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. So you can see why that's all they talked about for 400 years before Jesus. When this guy comes,
And the Pharisees came in and said, all the world is honoring him.
and the whole world is coming to him. I know. They're actually prophesying themselves. The whole world is going to him. Well, yeah, because that's what's going to happen in Daniel 7.
Years before,
Yeah.
he said.
So that's the Son of Man. I can't make that big enough. It should be capital letters and blazed on the ceiling. I don't know. And then he's going to be glorified. Now, what does he mean by glorified? Glorifying means to actually praise something, make it big. My best analogy is when you put something on a billboard, you're glorifying. You're making it big and pronounced in public, and you're making it known. It's what might be not easily seen. It might be kind of secret and hidden. When it's glorified, it's made big. So this is basically the made big word. So how is he going to be made big? Well, as a Jew, now you've got the mindset right. How is the Son of Man going to make himself big today? Take everything down. Take everything down. Take down the Romans. Take down these unjust and hypocritical religious leaders. Take everybody down. Bring justice like you've never seen justice. Man, you're going to see justice come down like nothing you've ever seen before today because he's going to be glorified. And everyone's going to know he's the Son of Man. Boom, big. So you got to think big. This is what's going to happen, big. Daniel says in Daniel 2 with the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, a stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. That's glorifying. Or in Daniel's dream a little bit later with the beasts. Oh, no, I went to 244. I'm sorry, I skipped too far. The God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. So, I mean, their expectation that the glory that they're going to see is going to be a gigantic justice affair is valid because that's what's in Daniel about the Son of Man. If you claim to be the Son of Man, you better follow up by crushing. That's what we would expect. So truly, truly, I say to you, Jesus goes on, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone, but if it dies, it bears much fruit. Oh, wait. Aren't we going to kill some Romans today?
If it dies, it bears much fruit.
This is what's astonishing about what Jesus does. He's had this gigantic entry, public and visual, into Jerusalem, people from over the hill and this side of the hill, and he comes in and then he stands right, Son of Man, glorified, and then he says this to these Greeks and everyone else listening. And everyone right here is saying, wait, what are you talking about? Why, I would expect him, if I was writing the Bible, at this point, I would have Jesus start quoting Daniel 7 and talk about crushing and use the word crush every other sentence. I would say, yep, I'm the guy. I'm going to crush this horrible injustice that you people, I love you, I'm going to take care of you, and we're crushing the Romans. But he doesn't say that. Now, I might start to think maybe he's talking about the death of the Romans is the seed that needs to die. Yes. That doesn't make any sense. Because look at the result. Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. That last thing, bears much fruit, tends to tell me this is a hopeful thing. This isn't just die like a seed, and like it's not coming up to Roman and say, die like a seed in the ground, pow, you're dead. No, there's something, and of course, in an agrarian culture like us, we understand if you put seeds in the ground, they sprout. If you take a grain of wheat and you put it in the ground, it's going to make a plant that can make 60 to 100 grains of wheat. Not a bad trade, but you still got to put it in the ground. When you plant a seed, you have a fundamental choice. You can either eat it or you can plant it and let it sprout. So planting and letting it sprout is a good deal. But it costs you your inventory right now to do that. See that? What could feed you in your inventory of seed stock, you're going to have to put in the ground, and you're going to have to let it die so that it can sprout up much more. So dying in this respect with a seed, we all know is a good thing. Bury it, put it in the ground. It's a good thing. But I'm burying my food for tomorrow morning. I know. But by letting it die, it's going to sprout 100-fold. Let it die. So Jesus suddenly takes these dreams of grandeur for the Son of Man. Crush. And he says, it's time to die. The Greeks are astonished. The people who've come to him from Bethany and watched Lazarus come from the dead are astonished. The people who came out from Jerusalem are astonished. And the religious leaders are standing back there going, say what? I mean, this is probably one of the largest awkward pauses in the entire ministry of Jesus, right here. Because clearly he's surrounded by so many people and so much fanfare who are just waiting to see what he's going to do next. And he says this.
I'm sure they didn't think he meant himself.
I don't think they thought of himself dying. Because after all, if he's the Son of Man, he's going to establish a kingdom that will never end. How can he die and have a kingdom that will never end? That's impossible. It's kingdom not of this world. I mean, you guys know the end of this story. But at this point in this story, everybody's confused.
I wish I could have heard the thoughts when he said that.
I know. Well, I think that was just the awkward. This is the thoughts.
Huh?
Waiting to explain himself. Yeah, true.
In the apocryphal text again, I wonder where Judas was at this time. Because Judas was.
Yeah, where was Judas? Yeah.
He was his biggest fan. He from the very beginning, he was his bosom friend, going and saying he was the biggest, cheerleader.
Judas.
This guy is going to just.
Judas wanted to see the crush
There's gonna
happen.
be a nuclear explosion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He was the biggest fan of the crush. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Judas wanted the crush.
He saw the miracles he did.
I think everyone took a step back and their jaws dropped and they, can you explain this? And it's interesting because John will say in another place that at this time all this stuff was going on, and at the time we, the apostles, didn't get it. And then they've been listening to him for 3 years in ministry and they didn't get it. And so he's saying in retrospect, many years later, maybe 50 years later, he's writing this and saying, at the time we just didn't get it. Duh, we didn't get it. But we, as people who know how the stories end, we get it. But he's saying, at the time we just didn't get it. Even though Jesus had warned them several times, even on the cusp of going back to Bethany to raise Lazarus from the dead, Jesus tells them, I'm going to be given over and I'm going to be taken and killed. But John says, well, we still didn't get it. Still didn't get it. Now, I ask you this, is this giving up the military dream of the crushing? Is there not going to be some overpowering that's going to happen and what's going to happen next? Or is it just about some symbolic act of this man who's now claiming to be the Son of Man and he's going to die and there's going to be some kind of fruit? I mean, what?
Well, Jesus didn't come to crush nations.
Not this time. Not this time. Exactly right. And that's exactly what he'll answer many times. I'm coming to save this time. But before you put aside the whole militaristic crushing win, it actually will happen in what's going to come up. And if you don't think what I'm saying is true, when we're done, read verse 31 in this chapter. Okay, read 31 and you'll see that this actually is a militaristic offensive of what Jesus is going to do. Ooh, okay, we got to move on. There's three things he's going to point out to these Greeks and to everyone else who's listening that's going to confound them. Number one, he says right here, death is part of the plan now. Because it's going to bring fruit. Nobody has a clue what he's talking about. No one knows how can a king and a Messiah and the Son of Man, how can his death be productive? What? He goes on to a second thing. He who loves his life loses it. He who hates his life in this world will keep it to life eternal. Oh, Jesus, you're killing us here. Sort of. I don't get this. I just don't get this. What? He who loves his life loses it, and who hates his life in this world will keep it to life eternal. So what he's doing is he's explaining the seed thing is what he's doing. Well, we still don't get it, Jesus. In fact, if you say this is a very familiar passage to you, you'll be right, because Jesus mentions this in all these other passages. This is a common theme to him, is the fact that, you know, if you love your life, you're going to lose it, which means the more that you embrace and protect and try and hoard life itself, it's going to slip through your fingers, you're going to lose it. It's only when you deliberately let go of that life that you find it given back to you from Jesus. It's the greatest paradox of the entire Bible, but it's very definitely true. And the reason for it is that the more you are bent toward yourself, that's hoarding life, the more you're going to lose life, because there is no life bent toward self. That's called sin. Yeah, Larry. Yeah, flowing stream you can't hold on to. Yeah. Yeah. How do you bring life here? You can try and hoard it, or you can let go, basically, and die. And God himself gives you new life. Gosh, it's almost like being born again. That's what he's talking about. See, it all holds together. He who loves his life loses it. He who hates his life, and when he says hate, he doesn't mean I hate myself. No, it's more like, no, I'm letting it go. I'm just letting it go. In this world, we'll keep it to life eternal. So he's saying what the trade is if you lose your life now, if you don't hoard life right now, then what you gain is life that's eternal, which is not saying just timeless, but it's bigger, God-oriented, God-originated life than anything you've ever thought of before. All you can hoard right now has nothing in comparison to what life from God's like. And so now you start to get the understanding. So what if I plant this seed of life now and let it die? I'll reap life beyond all understanding. That's what he's saying. That's what he's saying. So his second point in all of this is you can lose your life, even despite your best intentions. But sometimes it's best to just lose it straight up, which is exactly what Jesus is going to do pretty soon. Number 3. In this baffling descriptions, if anyone serves me, he must follow me. And where I am, there my servant will be also. If anyone serves me, the Father will honor him. Now it's getting personal. If he wants to be a seed and die and create some kind of fruitfulness because of his lost life, yeah, whatever, let him. I mean, Son of Man's kind of mysterious, whatever he wants to do, it's okay with me. But if he's saying that I'm going to follow him, I've got to follow in those footsteps? That I have to die too, in some sense, before I can find real life? I don't know. And see, he's surrounded by people who are following him. People who came from the resurrection of Lazarus. People who've seen him from town. I mean, there's a huge horde of people. And he's claiming to be the Son of Man. So yeah, I'll follow the Son of Man, because he's going to crush Rome. And he's saying, if you want to follow me into my death. Excuse me, this does not sound like the eternal kingdom. Are you some kind of imposter? You claim to be the Son of Man, but you've got a game plan that looks, well, self-destructive. How can this be steps toward what Daniel is promising? I just don't get it. And John, being honest, says, yeah, none of us got it at the time. It was a mystery to everybody. But John remembered these words and wrote them down later and said, Jesus told us everything was going to happen. And he says that if you want to follow the Son of Man, who will have this eternal kingdom, then you're going to have to start by following him to his death. Take up your cross and follow me. Now, are we talking about like a suicidal community? But we are talking about a community of people who put to death self. Remember I said that we're all tragically bent towards self, and the more you hoard that, there really is no life. I mean, if you're bent towards self and not God by exclusion, then all you have is self. You just have you alone in a dark gray room. It's you. All life comes from you. And if you've had any experience with you, you'll understand that that's pretty puny. Because when you say, God, go away, I just want me, the terror of that situation is you only have you. And there's no life there. But if that life dies and says, it's no longer about me, it's about him. If it's no longer bent toward self, but bent toward him, the one who gives life, everything changes. And it's not an understatement to say that in Christianity, it's not about me anymore. And the degree to which you start walking and saying, it is about me, it is about me, it is about me, you've bent towards self again. You're going to push God away. God waits for us to die like a seed, and then he brings fruitfulness. It's a death of self. It's a death of self. Now, that's not to say that life with God is all about dying, but it is about you dying, is what I'm saying. And what God can bring in fruitfulness, 60-fold, 100-fold, is beyond belief. But I got to tell you, you got to die. That's why pride goeth before the fall. That's why David just wrote when we read in Psalm 51, a broken and contrite heart. That's God. That's what you want right there. Not a prideful heart. Me is the center of the universe. Me, everything serves me, mine. There's a story about a kid in a grammar class who, see if I get this right. The teacher in the grammar class brought out two words, mine and my. And she said, what article of grammar is that? And the little kid raised his hand and says, that's an aggressive pronoun. It's supposed to be possessive pronoun, an aggressive pronoun. That's actually it. In the my and mine universe of us, it aggressively tries to take from the world and bring it to us, and we're the center of the universe, and we will be happy to the degree to which we can force the universe around us to serve us and make us happy. Ha ha ha, I'm happy. But unfortunately, you're still left with just you. Life with God is different. We have to die. And that's what he's saying right here. If you want to come with me, be where I am, be my servant, well, that's where you got to go. And anyone who serves me, the Father will honor him. This became an utter reality for the apostles. After Jesus dies, he's raised again. They're sent out basically to communicate the word about who this Son of Man is. They all, except for the Apostle John, serve in remote places until they're actually martyred and killed for what they're saying. In a real sense, they took up their cross and they followed him to the point of death. Even Peter, we have by historical accounts, they were going to crucify Peter. Peter said, no, that's way too honorable. Jesus died that way. What do you say, will you crucify me upside down? That's what they did. Because he could not lose his life the way the Savior did. And they did that. And you'd say, well, what miserable lives they must have had to be constantly hounded and chased and eventually killed because they promoted who this loving God through Jesus was. It's not a miserable life at all. Hard life, yeah. But in terms of a life of pouring yourself out in love for those, to invite those to come and entertain the idea of being with this loving God who reached out in the radiance of Jesus and said, I want you to join this fellowship I have already in the Trinity. I want you to be with us. I want you to enjoy life with us. And that was the greatest delight of their life. But as you stand back from a human perspective, you say, what a miserable life. No. They poured out themselves to bring others into that position. That's a great thing. And that's what Jesus says. That's what it's all about. So the last thing, follow. So the Son of Man comes into town to crush, to be crushed. To be crushed. And in being crushed, let's just look at it. Verse 31. He wins the war. I should have put this up here. You look at this and say, what a passive knuckling under to the powers that be. This was not a passive knuckling under to the powers that be. John, I'm getting there. This is why I put verses on the screen. John 12:31. Now judgment is upon this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. Crushed. By the Son of Man being crushed. Okay, we got to wrap this up. This is the best picture you can think of for what the Christian life is all about. Being allowed to die as a seed in the ground. For the purpose of just death? No. So that at that death, great life can come. I've got to die. Paul himself says, I have been crucified with Christ. That's death, you know. I've been crucified with Christ. And it's no longer I that live, but Christ lives in me. This is the theme of the New Testament and the Old. It's all about those who hoard life will lose it. It'll slip through your fingers. You misunderstand. Life is not all about you. Life is all about God. And the degree to which you let yourself die and be planted, he will raise you up like he did Lazarus from the dead. There is life after death. And life that he brings in that resurrection life is life that's beyond anything you could ever design or imagine on your own, let alone actually make happen. He brings life. Life is with him. And that's what the Son of Man has come into town to tell people. I've come to bring life and to give it abundantly. But the first thing that's going to happen is I'm going to have to die. And I stand knocking at the door. And if you open the door, I'll come into you. So all through all of this, the justice of the Son of Man from Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 isn't just about putting right how evil in the world does wrong. It's really putting away evil so that there's space for the love of God to invite you into fellowship with him. Make you worthy in that sense. Because we are all like David, stained from the sins that we do. Unqualified, unworthy to be part of this. And until the Son of Man can come and die on our behalf, we'll never be made worthy to be part of that, to partake in the wonderful fellowship and love of God. And so the Son of Man will have to die. Years later, many of the apostles will talk about, especially Paul, let's talk about the love of God. You want to understand the love of God? How many times from your friends who love you, how many of them would die for you? What do you think? A couple? How many of your enemies would die for you knowing that they hate you and stuff like that? Probably none. But here's the love of God manifest in Jesus, that while we were yet sinners, he died for us. While we were yet rebellious, he died for us. He made provision for us to be included into his kingdom, to be included into the fellowship with God himself. Here's God reaching from heaven itself through Jesus, the radiance of who God is and the full embodiment of who he is, dying on our behalf and saying, the door is open now. Before even better, the Son of Man has come to make a way. And now, like the temple that used to have that veil between the Holy of Holies where God was and the outside part, that veil when Jesus is dead is rent in half, opening it up, like throwing open the doors and saying, okay, now you can come in. Why? To be with me and to enjoy me and have fellowship with me and be delighted in who I am. That's what God, since the beginning of time, has been working toward for you and I. Started with the creation, the coming of the Son of Man, all of these things. Not just to right injustice, but to invite us into fellowship with him. And this day, the Son of Man stood up there with everyone hoping he would crush the Romans, the Son of Man. And he said, it's time to die. But after death is life bigger than you could ever imagine. You want that? Follow me. I've been crucified with Christ. This caused such a stir with the people standing there that it takes the last half of this chapter, chapter 12, for them to interact with him. So we're going to pick this up and keep going next week. They explore this even more. And I don't get it. I mean, how can this work? How's this going? What? And this will be Jesus' last public discourse in the book of John. After this, everything we hear from the lips of Jesus is things he says privately with the apostles in quiet places. This is his parting shot to all the multitudes. And next week, he'll explain in detail further what this is all about. Okay, let's pray. Father, we know the end of the story, and yet, as I read, I'm still astonished. There is nothing and nowhere Jesus went where there wasn't shock, where there wasn't amazement, where there wasn't confusion. And yet the truth was there, right on the surface, laid bare by the Son of Man who explained himself. And in doing so, opened the doors for us to come to you. Lord, I pray as these weeks go on, as we approach these last few days in the life of Jesus, that you would give us a renewed sense, not only of the cost incurred at the death of Jesus, but that this was not an accident or a situation that ran amok and out of hand and out of control, but this was your deliberate design, your deliberate intention from the beginning of all creation, brought about in a linear and controlled and sovereign way in order to provide us a way to come to you. So thank you for this, and thrill our hearts with this Jesus who fully is you, who made you manifest, and who came in the flesh to die and bring us to you. Thank you for all this in Jesus' name. Amen.